Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto video. This is going to be some speculation ahead of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 5, which I think is coming out December 20th. So we're about 2-ish weeks away from the release of the chapter. You'll note that I didn't do speculation videos ahead of the last two chapters because I didn't really feel like the chapters in a way leading into them had done too much to allow me to speculate. But chapter 4 was a great chapter, and it actually kind of changed, in a way, evolved the series to the point where there is actually quite a bit to speculate about. So I have a whole document here that we can go through about some thoughts about some of the stuff revealed in chapter 4, as well as what could potentially happen in chapter 5. Obviously, chapter 4 was a volume-ending chapter, so we go into chapter 5, which is going to be the start of 2 Blue Vortex Volume 2. Now, typically, they do this as sort of like an arc type thing. Where chapter 4 ended is a bit of an interesting point there, because it did feel like Boruto's escape from the village is to a certain degree like the end of the introduction arc for 2 Blue Vortex, and we could kind of in a way take a break and do some stuff before we build back into the kind of like next appearance of Boruto going up against the new kind of villains or whatever. But let's get into it here. So obviously the big thing here is that we have seen the 10 Tails taken in a very new direction. This is a new unexpected plot. We go from the plot sort of being with Code, this almost expecting another like divine tree plot, that it's just stop Code from achieving his goals, because of course he wants to be the kind of legacy of Ishiki. And again, we have that whole idea where Ishiki told him that if you actually eat a divine tree, you will become an Otsutsuki. So yeah, that obviously makes sense. We want to avoid that, Code getting like full Otsutsuki kind of powers in that way. But it was relatively standard. We've seen the divine tree be used this way before. So now we are kind of doing something different. Code's position within the series has sort of evolved a little bit, where it does feel like he is presented as this always failing villain. But because of that, it means that he is sort of sticking around. They are not making the decision to just kill him off, even though it seems like quite a few of the main characters are more powerful than him. And beyond just being sort of powerful enough to cause issues, Code is not the threat that we maybe think he is, but he has technically caused this kind of expansion. So now we have the 10 Tails is now basically these multiple new villain characters with a kind of, who knows, potentially evolving motive different than just grow a divine tree, eat the chakra fruit. They are growing in intelligence, and who knows, there might be more than the initial 4 introduced. That might in fact be the way they go, who knows. But we do need to talk about this plot development here, because they have not only effectively like introduced like new villains, but sort of a new type of being in a way. This is very different kind of what they've done, but it's similar to previous stuff that we've seen. So let's go through some of the lore of the 10 Tails here, because it can get quite confusing, because we have the original take on them, then we have the more recent stuff from the middle of kind of like Boruto part 1, and then this is obviously a new reveal. So, originally, of course, what we found out was that the original 10 Tails was split into 9 by the Sage of Six Paths to create the 9-tailed beasts, including Kurama and the others, obviously. So this is interesting by itself, because we're basically talking about the idea of fragments of a 10 Tails becoming sort of sentient, growing in intelligence. Yet, as far as we're aware, the Sage of Six Paths did that already. Now, obviously, the new villains are different because they're more humanoid, rather than, obviously, in this case, it's like the 10 Tails beast turned into 9 smaller beasts, effectively. Whereas this is kind of 10 Tails being split off into, effectively, random, like, seemingly just grunt characters who then gain intelligence by sort of capturing people in the trees. So But still, there is a uniqueness here because it highlights the idea of, well, intelligence and the idea of like a fragment of this seemingly mindless monster becoming intelligent has already happened before in the series. And maybe it prompts the idea that, like, what if we need to really do stuff with the tail beasts to actually, like, defeat these kind of new style, almost tail beast style things. The second point here, obviously, is the kind of main plot point we're dealing with, or had been dealing with, and that is obviously that the Ten Tails are treated by the Otsutsuki as seedlings, and are basically the core of the Otsutsuki plan to achieve godhood and just increase their power. And that is by constantly draining planets and consuming chakra fruits. And of course, they do this by, they plant a Ten Tails on the planet, they sacrifice effectively their partner Otsutsuki to that Ten Tails. Then that activates the Ten Tails. It turns into a divine tree. It soaks up basically all life energy on the planet. That makes the chakra fruit, and then the chakra fruit, as this kind of amalgamation of all of the kind of effectively evolution and power on the planet, evolves the Otsutsuki to a higher level. And the idea is that over time, you do this enough times, you become a god, like Shibai Otsutsuki did in the past, which is an interesting thing just by itself. But now, what we have here is that the idea is that Code inadvertently helped the fragments of the new Ten Tails to evolve by adding his Clawmark divine jutsu to them. We have 4 of these new kind of evolved divine tree characters, but potentially more. So right now it seems like we have a Sasuke character, a Moegi character, a Bug character, and I think the last one is meant to be Jigen, because in the dialogue it's mentioned sort of like both past and present. So it's the idea that it's not just that they have to capture like a living person in the tree. It seems like it can be done with people of the past, because, you know, as far as we're aware, the way that the whole chakra fruit stuff works and evolving people works is that it literally, in a way, takes the evolution history almost of the planet into the fruit. And I guess that means that because Jigen Ishiki died on the planet, it is possible for them to do this. How exactly that one works, we're not really sure, but I'm sure they'll explain this kind of as we go on. But you can see straight away the idea of, like, it's interesting what they're doing here. The Ten Tails is suddenly this incredibly important thing, even more so than it ever was before, because it's the origin of the tail beasts, which were hugely important in original Naruto. It is what the Otsutsuki are all about in more kind of like the end of Naruto, and then what Boruto has been about. And now it is related to, of course, it's the core of the new villains that we have here. Now, obviously, as I pointed out, there's some connection between the idea of 1 and 3. Tail beasts, fragments of a Ten Tails becoming intelligent, but in different ways. Because obviously the idea is the Sage of Six Paths had like all these powers. He himself was an Otsutsuki, and he split them apart, and whatever way he split them apart didn't just create basically the same things that Code made. He didn't make Claw Grimes, he created 9 intelligent tail beast characters. Because like Kurama is a fully sentient being, effectively, especially when he got his sort of hatred under wraps, and the same is true of a lot of the other ones as well, so that is interesting. But of course they were beasts, whereas we're going for more humanoid characters this time. So what's the whole deal here about how Code simply adding his claw mark, giving them intelligence? So this is sort of the idea of, like, okay, if you feed an Otsutsuki to the Ten Tails, it becomes a divine tree. But if you just basically give the Ten Tails itself one of the powers you basically get from the chakra fruit, basically, you kind of evolve it itself. And that's what we're doing here, is it effectively is, what if the Ten Tails itself became intelligent and wanted to do something itself? What is it about, and what is it actually trying to do? And that's my whole point here, is that, like, does this maybe mean they're going to go back and explain some of this stuff, that what the Sage of Six Paths did was somehow different in some way? and so on. But still, it's just interesting to go back and connect all those pieces together, because the reveal that the Ten Tails is a seed for the Otsutsuki is kind of very, very interesting. So, move on to a different point here. So, the other thing here is obviously, why has the series, why have the writers even decided to introduce new villains in the first place? There's already a lot going on. We have the big switch with Boruto and Kawaki to reverse eventually. We have to probably do Boruto and Kawaki at some point. That's probably the main personal character plot based on the end of part 1. Code is still around, and obviously they've changed his role a bit, but he has survived. He was basically about to be killed by Boruto's new technique, but he revoked it in the last chapter. And then, of course, Demon and Ada are still potential threats out there because of just how insanely powerful they are, especially Demon as effectively the most powerful character in the series. It also gives him a chance, in a way, to fight other characters, because he can potentially go up against these Otsutsukis and potentially deal with them. That could be interesting. But the introduction of these new characters does complicate everything, because it gets in the way of kind of this happening anytime soon. It gets in the way of attempting to reverse what's happened here, what's going on here. So obviously what they wanted was Boruto to be separated from Sasuke and in a terrible position where he has so many people close to him to save. He obviously has to try and save his parents, who are trapped by Kawaki. He now has to save Sasuke, who is trapped by the tree and these kind of new enemies. And in general, he has to reverse his situation to sort of, reverse the destiny in a way that is upon him. So that's the whole idea here, is these new villains basically allow for all of these interesting kind of personal matchups, as I guess characters are going to have to defeat the Divine Tree version of their friend or mentor to potentially save the original. Whatever dynamic they're going to do, they seem to prompt the idea, I think Sarada points it out, is that clearly Boruto feels that there is a way to reverse this, because he feels at the end of the chapter, like he says to Sasuke, and that you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, that I couldn't quite do it here, but that he seems to think there is a way. So obviously the idea is one of them is a Sasuke Divine Tree. So we have Boruto and Sarada. I would assume that would be the really obvious one here. These two against this kind of Sasuke version. That seems very clear. It has to be Boruto going up against the Sasuke one. They've already set it up basically here. One of them is very clearly Moegi, and I think everyone is leaning in this direction because the hairstyle just matches up too perfectly. Now, there's obviously some questions about this. When did this exactly happen? How did Moegi get captured? But obviously this is, Moegi is the overall leader of Team 10. So that brings these characters, Inojin, Shikadai, and Chocho into play, in terms of like, they're the other members of the kind of Boruto's class that we're actually focusing on in the manga, so they probably will have to have a fight at some point, and going up against her seems like a very interesting thing to save their kind of overall kind of team captain. The one that's based on Bug is interesting because Bug, his connection is obviously to the old Kara members. At the moment, it seems like there's a certain loyalty there with Code. But is Code, does Code actually care about Bug? And that's the question here, is like, other than I guess he's a villain that we have to defeat, is there actually the personal connection here in this fight? Code would be the one to make sense, potentially like, I will save the only kind of person who actually stuck with me, joined my side. It could be an interesting way to do something different with Code. And then the other one, obviously, we're thinking it's Jigen, potentially. So Kawaki is obviously the other real main character we haven't really brought into play here. He's anti-Otsutsuki, so another character who is sort of taking on the appearance of Jigen and Otsutsuki, but is actually using sort of the source of the Otsutsuki's powers as their powers. It would fit, I think, in line with Kawaki's wanting to wipe out all the Otsutsukis, and I think he would want to take out this one himself. So that feels like something that you probably do want to do. And if that's what they're doing here, is just like, we want to have these characters fight against other characters, so we know what their, in a way, like, movesets are in the kind of current era, ahead of the more personal fight. That way, at least we know what Boruto has, what Kawaki has, and so theoretically, when they do face off against each other, how's it going to play out? You kind of have to, I think, do that rather than their fight being the debut of most of their new techniques. So there's that. Then we go into the big question for these new evolved Divine Tree villains, and that is, what is the motive of these characters? It seems like they're maybe suggesting it's not just the typical, like, drain the planet, harvest the chakra fruit plot, because they did note the idea of, like, oh, we let you get away because we were, like, distracted by our growing intelligence, that we let that kind of get in the way of our drive, or our, like, imperative drive, which is to try and make a divine tree. So are they saying that, like, right now, while they're not fully evolved, they're kind of like, well, we still kind of do want to do that? Because it would make sense, because, you know, the question is going to come up here is, like, because they themselves are 10 tails, can they even use their own powers to empower themselves? I'm going to guess they probably can, because it seems like it's just that the nature of their being allows them to sort of, in a way, convert energy from, like, the planet that they kind of suck in, and then create this fruit in the end. It doesn't seem like it's this weird kind of, like, energy being created from nothing. It's just that they have the ability to create this edible, in a way, source of energy. So it would make sense that they can, like, turn themselves into some sort of a living divine tree type thing. And when the process completes, they eat the fruit that they've made themselves and gain that power. There might be some sort of a dynamic where, like, because they're alive now, they're kind of like, wait, I don't need to transfer it into a fruit. I'll just absorb it myself, and that's a way to gain power. So again, this maybe brings up the idea of, like, do they want to become gods? Is that why we've maybe introduced that kind of plot element of the Otsutsuki gods? Is that, as far as we're aware, it seems like this whole idea of characters being able to evolve is not just with the Otsutsukis. We've already seen it here with the Ten Tails in particular, of, like, they can evolve, the Otsutsuki can evolve. In a way, humans can evolve, because even the fact that, like, Boruto is technically an Otsutsuki is kind of like, well, I guess, but he is still human, and, like, Otsutsuki seems to be more of a just, because you possess a specific power, it makes you an Otsutsuki. But an Otsutsuki doesn't obviously seem to be entirely kind of, like, alien, so it's a weird thing that we're kind of getting into. But if it's not related to power, then what is it actually going to be? Because eventually you assume they'll hit a point where they're intelligent enough to realize that, oh yeah, we shouldn't be just completely driven by the idea of making the chakra fruit. It will kind of be a cool thing if we were able to do it, but what do we actually want to do? There is the potential for some very cool stuff here, because it's basically the idea of, like, a creature without anything except a single drive developing intelligence, and what does that actually mean? They could go down a very different path depending on what the approach is, obviously. Then I think I discussed this in my review a little bit, but I want to get into it a little bit more. Speculation about, like, the origins of the Otsutsuki and how it potentially relates to what's going on here. Because obviously there's so much that we don't know about the Otsutsuki. We don't know their origins. They are called aliens because they're obviously from a different planet, and they are summed up as basically being parasites. And that fits with the whole idea of the karma thing of, like, their original body, in a way, for a lot of them, I guess, has been long lost, and they, through their powers, are just constantly able to be reborn in other people, and they effectively exist as kind of, you know, data, like living souls effectively, and they are very difficult to kill off. So it does speak to the idea of, like, how did this even start in the first place? Because we know they grow in power by using the Ten Tails. That's what we know. They are the ones who plant the Ten Tails and powers, activate the whole divine tree thing, and then they eat the fruit. But the question is obviously, where do they get the Ten Tails from? We only know of 2 Ten Tails at the moment. But the implication, I think, from Amado is that they have access to many more, potentially. So what is the origin of the Ten Tails? And that's a big thing. And if they have been parasites and have effectively maybe evolved from being an incredibly weak species to being the most powerful, how did they, in a way, get to a point where they gained control over these other creatures, the Ten Tails, with such incredible potential to grant power to people? Because that's effectively what they are. Ten Tails, based on what we know, is just a giant mass of chakra, effectively, because it obviously splits it up into like the tail beasts are known as like chakra creatures. So there's that, and then there's these other mechanics that relate to the fact that they can, if activated properly, basically entrap everyone who's living on the planet, drain their energy, and create this source of energy. What's the deal there? Like, are they both species from the same original planet? Or what maybe is beginning to come into play here is, are Otsutsuki themselves, is their origin as effectively being evolved Ten Tails? Like, these new villains, are they kind of, in a way, effectively showing us, to some degree, how the Otsutsuki themselves started out? That one Ten Tails realized that by, in a way, consuming another Ten Tails, they can create this source of power that they can then use to evolve themselves, and we kind of just went on from here. Because there's obviously some inherent connection between the Otsutsuki specifically and the Ten Tails. The fact that a Ten Tails eating a full Otsutsuki is what activates the Divine Tree mechanism. And why is that as such? Is it just that the Ten Tails activates when any large source of power is put into it? We don't really know overall. So, that's the question. What if the Otsutsukis are just like evolved Ten Tails? They realize that by cannibalizing their own kind, it leads to more power, and they just went with it. It sort of makes sense because of that whole sacrifice mechanism, which has been one of the things that the series has been most consistent on. You can't activate this unless you sacrifice one. And currently on the planet, there is only Boruto and Kawaki, which by itself is super interesting because they are still in essence human, both of these characters, but their DNA has been altered by the whole karma thing, which karma, remember, it is a shinjutsu. It's just one of those divine abilities got basically by gaining power. So that's interesting by itself. The other thing, obviously, is that Naruto fundamentally is a ninja series. The source of chakra, which is the source of why characters can do ninjutsu, is effectively like Ten Tails related stuff and how it connects to Otsutsuki as well. So like there's that whole dynamic in it as well, which is I think super interesting from like a lore perspective within the series. So next point then, so the ending of chapter 4 obviously presents the potential for a great flashback sequence, because the reveal that Sasuke has been trapped in one of these trees was pretty big, because it obviously suggests that this happened before, like this is the earliest incident of this happening that we know. And it obviously relates to the fact that we know that Code encountered Boruto and Sasuke in the middle of the time skip. Now we know some of the details. Sasuke was potentially the first character turned into a tree, but then there's also this interesting dynamic where Code is completely unaware until the events of chapter 4 that he has actually created these evolved beings. But Boruto already knows. Why is this? Does that mean that like Code, for whatever reason, retreats from the fight with Boruto and Sasuke, but he leaves Claw Grimes behind and they see one of them effectively evolve into the Sasuke Divine Tree? Or is it because of Kashin Koji, that in the meantime, since the death of Ishiki, he has been more monitoring what's happening with the Ten Tails? And now these evolved Divine Tree characters, is he the one who is aware that this has actually happened? Because this is the thing here. It's like, it feels like we now need to see this flashback sequence, to see this fight in the past, to see Sasuke actually get taken by the tree, and that we assume he probably went down saving Boruto, but what exactly happened. And probably maybe both of them were bailed out by the arrival of Kashin Koji. So it seems like he is now Boruto's replacement master, since Boruto is obviously using some of the kind of Toad style stuff. We haven't, I suppose, directly seen him like do some of the same jutsus as Kashin Koji, but just the fact that he's using the toads themselves is kind of interesting. And we'll see if that changes as we go forward. It speaks to the idea of like, under who did he learn some of the techniques he has, like the flying Raijin. Did Sasuke teach him that, or did Kashin Koji teach him that? I'm guessing maybe Kashin Koji, because like he's the Jiraiya clone, and Jiraiya, trained Minato, that whole thing. It's a bit of an interesting dynamic. So yeah, did he arrive to save Boruto when Sasuke get turned into a tree? What are his goals now that the Shiki is dealt with? It does seem to be dealing with the Ten Tails to protect the planet, because he scolds Boruto when Boruto gets back that, like, were you trying to destroy the planet? Because, of course, Boruto is one of the few ways that a divine tree could actually be activated. Now, what we don't really know with these living Ten Tails, living divine trees, is what actually happens if one of them were to consume Boruto or Kawaki. Like, do they lose their individuality and become a tree? Or is there some sort of a kind of intelligent living version of that same process where they can keep themselves alive, and what happens there? Are they all interlinked? Like, if one of them eats Boruto or Kawaki, does that activate the entire thing? Or are they all separate? Because that's the whole idea now that we have, is that there's clearly this separation of, like, there are 4 notable chunks of the Ten Tails, but then the Claw Grimes still exist and are other chunks as well. So what's happening there? One of the big plot points that I don't think's maybe been talked about too much is that the biggest chunk of the Ten Tails is gone. So where is that? Like, are they holding on to that? Or has that disappeared with the kind of coming to the forefront of larger fragments of it in the 4 kind of intelligent character copies? Who knows? A lot of questions. Every time I do one of these speculations, I feel I have to do this segment, and that is just hey, where's Amado? What's he up to? He knows a lot of stuff, and there's still mystery surrounding his character. He has not appeared in quite a long time at this point, so there's still a lot going on with him. We haven't seen him since the swap happened at the end of the last Boruto series. So, obviously, his goals. He still wants to resurrect his daughter, Akebi. And all of the stuff he's put into place for this to happen is in place. And that is that he needs Kawaki to do it. Because the details on this are that basically he has implanted Akebi's sort of like memories, data effectively into Kawaki's karma that he himself was the one to give back to Kawaki. And the idea is that Amado's cloning of bodies for Akebi never worked, but if he creates a clone and then Kawaki implants the karma mark that has Akebi's data into the clone, that is a god ability, which is the karma, activating, and this would actually fix what just science on its own can't fix, because it is the power of a god doing this. Because if the Otsutsukis can basically resurrect themselves in that way, this also makes a lot of sense. So this seems like it is going to work, but when is this actually going to happen? We've had a time skip, and it obviously doesn't maybe seem like it has happened, or has it happened already? And then there's obviously the question about, like, wait, are you saying that karma actually works in multiple ways? Like, it's not just you have your own karma, but that it actually does work like this, where, like, if you do get the data of another person, you can just create karma for them because you're the one using the power. Because the question here is obviously, like, if Akebi is resurrected with karma, is she an Otsutsuki then? And then how exactly does that work? in all of this, because the karma constructs a body from that. Like, I assume there will be some sort of like an extraction type process happening here, because the karma would have to extract through the clone to properly become Akebi's body. But then when it completes, does that have an effect on Kawaki? Because of some of the karma mechanics that we got during the death of Ishiki kind of whole plot. There's some complex stuff going on here. The other big thing to me has always been that he's the one who gave Ada and Demon their powers. Just the fact that, like, even with Kawaki, like, he can just implant karma back into people. Like, what's going on here? Like, it's this crazy situation where he, at some point, had access to Shibai Otsutsuki's DNA to give these crazy powers to these characters who we now know as being some of the most powerful in the series. We assume Ishiki had access to this and through Amado made this happen, but like, this is the big thing. This is why Amado knows so much, is that he was so heavily involved in these technical aspects. But is there more going on here? I want to know what he's about during all of this. Is he immune to the swap? Because if the swap affects Amado, he thinks Boruto is the one who can help him resurrect his daughter, and that would explain why it maybe hasn't happened. But if it hasn't affected him, then there's even more interesting stuff going on. So then, we get into, this is like the final segment, just specifically for Chapter 5. That was just a lot of, here's what Chapter 4 presented, here's what it means. For Chapter 5, it does feel like this is probably a good opportunity to do the flashback, to explain what actually happened to Sasuke, what the incident was with Code during the time skip, and also when did Koji arrive. Because it does sort of feel like it's a nice break point a little bit, where like Boruto came back to the village but then was forced to escape. The Clawgrime characters, the evolved Divine Tree characters, were in that other dimension where the Ten Tails originally was, where Code went to, whatever way you want to call it. They're there, so they're not at the village. Like, is the attack on the village done because the four intelligent members of the army went after Boruto? So, like, how safe is the village currently is, like, an obvious question. Or are they immediately going to go back to the village now, and the village is actually under siege, and stuff is actually going to happen very, very quickly? But I do think feels like a reasonable time to go and do the flashback to explain all of this stuff of like, yeah, how did Sasuke get got by what would have had to have been at the time just a random Clawgrime? Or this brings up sort of stuff like, wait, are some of the other ones like older? The Bug one, I guess, seems to have happened more recently, but the Jigen clone and maybe even the Moegi clone, have they been in play for a while? That's the kind of question that I would have. So, because the Jigen one was the one who sort of spoke the most, so he might have been there. That would maybe explain how Sasuke was able to be overpowered. But as far as we're aware, before Boruto has done all of his training, Code would be more powerful than Boruto and Sasuke, because Sasuke doesn't have the Rinnegan anymore. So there's some interesting stuff there. So what else do we do? Like, otherwise, are we into like another training arc here? Seems a bit early for that. Are we going to get some villain focus to explain them a little bit more because of their introduction? Are we going to do more of an identity reveal for some of the other characters? Like, actually reveal that, like, yeah, this one is Moegi. Because it's cool that fans have potentially figured this out, but it also does feel like she's kind of obscure enough of a character where you probably need to point that out. Also, the Jigen one, I think, probably needs to be just directly explained, you know, as is. And obviously this would bring Team 10 potentially into play if they explain the Moegi situation. When did she actually get turned into a tree? That's a big question. And then stuff I've been asking for since we started Two Blue Vortex is basically just Sarada's training. What's her skill level like, especially when it comes to the Mangekyo Sharingan? Kakashi seems like the really obvious character to get that training from, potentially, but was there anyone else? Was Sakura involved? Like, because we haven't really seen Sakura since we returned here. And then a big one is obviously, how does Kawaki feel about this extra complication of these new villain characters coming into play? And this is going to, like I said, very, very much complicate what's going on in all of this. But I am super excited for Chapter 5. I just hope they can continue the hype that they delivered, I think, very strongly in Chapter 4. I hope they don't do their typical thing of, and now we'll go back to the beginning and build towards Chapter 8, the Volume 2 cliffhanger. I hope they actually can deliver strong stuff in Chapter 5, 6, 7, and the expected really good Chapter 8 type stuff. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on everything I had to say here in the video. Where do you think they're going with these new characters? Where do you think they're going? Obviously, I think we can roughly maybe predict who's going to fight who, but what are their motivations? Like, the nature of their being? Like, what is the intent of giving fragments of the Ten Tails this sort of intelligence, and where do you think they're going to go with it? And like, is this just to sort of extend out the series so that it takes a little bit longer for us to get to some of our other plots, or what? But that has been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. But that's been it. Thanks for watching, and bye.